And so my name is Dr. Aaron Willis, and I'm the Chief Learning Officer for Social Studies School Service. I'm going to be working with you today, and we're going to be doing a focus session on using primary sources, primarily in U.S. and world history, though we're going to see if we can work a few things in for Texas history in particular, as well as maybe some sixth grade religions types of resources. So we'll see what we can find there. I am assisted by my able colleague, Pam Gothard. Pam's going to be monitoring the chat area for you. So if you do have questions that come up, feel free to post something to the chat. You really, since we're such a small group here today, I'm also comfortable if you just want to unmute yourself and just yell out, wait, Aaron, stop. What did you just show us? Go back, whatever it is. I'm pretty unflusterable if you interrupt me. So either way, post to the chat, yell out any questions that come up. Let me share my screen and show you what my intention is for us to cover today. And that would be right here. So let's see. Pam, are we seeing my agenda on the screen? You're muted, but I
I'm
think you said
muted.
yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, we've got it now.
Okay, so we're calling this session Working with Primary Sources in History, and we should be done by 3 o'clock your time today. We just did the welcome and the survey. The survey was a survey of what you guys are teaching, so I get an idea of what topics, where you are in the various curricula in order to pull examples. Then I'm going to go in and we're going to focus on searching for series titles. So I've got a few series that I know use primary sources. And so if you're familiar with that series, you can always ask yourself, hey, I wonder if there's a history unfolding activity on industrialization, and then you know what you're searching for. So we're going to focus on 4 primary series today. That's what I call my focus series: History Unfolding, Debating the Documents, The Historian's Apprentice, and the DBQ Writing Program. And that's going to be our primary ones. I want to make sure that I show you how to find those, where they are, and how they work. And so you've got a good sense of why you might want to use those and which student groups you might want to use them. Time permitting, I also identified a few additional titles, these document-based assessments, the great documents in U.S. history, and primary source activities that are also available for U.S. and world history. And then that should leave us some time for questions and answers at the very end. So the main goal today really is to make you guys familiar. We have over 50 different series titles in Active Classroom. I think actually close to 60 now that you'll find in your pull down menu in terms of choices of things you can search for. So we're just going to be searching on these 4 focus ones and maybe these 3 additional ones because they're really, really good with primary sources. And Pam, even if for those of you that may have taken part in the previous session, identified another title that we call History's Mysteries. Mysteries, oh wait. So I'll add that in here and we'll talk about that too. And then the other ones are for 6th grade: Hungry, Planet, Material World, and What I Eat. And these have primary sources as well. So adding a few things there. And let me just post this list to the chat so that you guys have a copy. You can keep track of it as well. I'm gonna go here. Here's chat. And let's see if this formatting comes across. Looks like it did okay. Okay, so now you guys have that. You can copy and paste that list out of the focus series that we're going to be looking at. Okay, let me go into Active Classroom. And just a second for me to go back here. And we're in the right account. Awesome. So our focus today on primary sources, we're going to go to our activities search area. And what we want you to do is be able to go in and search for a specific title. So the first one I mentioned, we're going into advanced. Now, there are different ways to search. We could say, oh, I want US history, and you talked about the early republic. I think that corresponds with what we call the new nation. And so you can do a general search on, hey, everything that's available for the new nation, what do I have here? And you're going to find a lot of content, 7 pages, 20 per page. So 140 different activities just on that particular period in history. But what I want to focus on is, well, what I want to work with primary sources for that period. So what do you have? I said the first thing I wanted to show you is one called History Unfolding. The reason I really like History Unfolding, and the subtitle is The Way We Saw It in Illustration and Art, is because this is primary sources that are visual primary sources. So this is usually the first place I like to begin, and that is with something that's accessible to all students, no matter what their reading level or their readiness levels. They can look at an image, they can look at something, and they'll be able to find something in there, be able to draw information out of it. We want them to find facts, to gather evidence from a primary source. That's going to be the main thing we're trying to do here. So look at, we've got a number of these different things in terms of being able to look at this. So here's the early republic, and you mentioned that that leads into industrialization. So let's look at this one on industry and social change, because it looks like that's going to be a natural lead in from where you are to where you're going. All of the history unfolding activities, and this is why I focus on a series title, they all take the same form, okay? You're gonna have a teacher's guide here, you'll have a downloadable overview that you can download, but the main activity is down here really for the students. So here's what the students will see. They'll get an introduction to Industrial Revolution in the early Republic. And so we start here and it goes from 1800, early 1800s. By 1860, the young republic was still mainly agricultural. So we get an idea of where this might be going, and then we'll pick up late 19th century industrialization elsewhere. But we have 3 illustrations or images here. So these are going to be different little, it looks like they're political cartoons that cover information for the period. So each one, as we go to illustration number 1 here, we get background information here. Once again, this is mostly a visual primary source activity, so there's not a lot of reading in terms of the background, but a short, couple of sentences. What's the background to this particular picture? I can click on it and go in, and then down below, I have scaffolding questions to help me through analyzing. What do I need? We want to support students in their analysis, right? And so we're going to support them in different ways. Now I'm going to hide the answers right now. Remember, I'm in the teacher preview mode. So as a teacher, I'm seeing the answers in green here. But if I want to simulate what the students would say, you'll see they just get sort of these. If I click back on this now, they're going to get these blank areas to fill in where they put the answers in. Now, before we even look at this image, I just want to make sure you see a component of this. Here in this question, students are told explicitly that the skill that they're developing with this question is identifying facts, whereas the skill they're developing with this question is interpreting meanings. And other types of things you might see here are understanding bias or point of view, or writing about an activity. So there's going to be different skills. So that's one of the first things is that I like about these history unfolding activities is they're going to give visual primary sources to students that are accessible. At the same time, they're going to help scaffold the students through, well, what evidence do I need to pull out of this image? We're going to have questions that are going to help them. And we're not going to hide from the students in terms of what skills we're trying to develop. We want you to understand better how to interpret meetings. We want you to understand better how to identify facts and gather evidence, because that's going to be one of the key skills that we take away. Now, once we're in and we're able to analyze an image, we can go, we've got several different tools here. So I might start with this full screen, and I can look at the full screen. I can see that this is like a political cartoon from a book called Yankee Notions. And then we can begin to sort of like try and figure out what's going on here. And I skipped quickly past the, here it says Patty's Ladder to Wealth in a Free Country. Okay, so you've got this ladder to wealth, and it's not clear exactly what he's got in his hands here. I can escape from full screen, and I can encourage students to analyze this. So we could do this both remotely and in person. We could have students working alone to analyze it, or they could be working in small groups. You could have one group do illustration 1, another group do illustration 2, another group do illustration 3, and then jigsaw them back together to share what they've discovered. We can also turn on a tool like our magnifying tool here and go in and sort of get in sort of greater detail and trying to figure out what are the elements, what are even the elements that I'm seeing in this picture. Clearly I've got a ladder here. We've got this saying at the bottom. And so the students sort of piecing this together as a puzzle. They can also turn on the quadrant tool and just look at one quadrant at a time as a way to focus in. So these are some of the techniques that we use to help students understand that what you do with a primary source is you gather evidence, and you can use different tools like dividing it up into quadrants, or using a magnifying glass, or going to full screen in order to be able to analyze those images. So not a lot of sophistication here, not a lot that we're asking the students to do, basically just to look closely at the image, and we give them some ideas here. So the first question, the caption says, Patty's Ladder to Wealth in a Free Country. Patty was a name used for immigrant groups that came to America in large numbers in the 1840s. What immigrant group was that? Okay, so they need to go through and they need to try and figure out, based on previous knowledge as well as any hints that might be in here in the picture, what they're looking at. Then we're going to look at the face of this 1857 drawing. The way of the drawing, the Irish was common. Ooh, that could be a hint for the answer up here. Was a common stereotype in the 1850s. It is also a very insulting stereotype. What is the stereotype and what makes this one so insulting? So we're asking students to interpret what they think is happening here with the imagery in the activity. Okay, so all of the history unfolding activities, if I go back to another one, and let's go out to, here's something that's happening later, mechanical power and factory production. So we can go and we can take a look at that one. And the first thing we're going to notice is, oh, look at the table of contents is exactly the same. It's taking exactly the same format. If I want to go and look at illustration 1, illustration 2, let me go in here. I can click on this. And so we've got imagery here, and then we've got, this is about, looks like development of cotton and fabrics. And so we've got 4 scaffolding questions to help the students know what to look for in this image. And then they have the same tools like their magnifying tool or their quadrant tool, where they're able to analyze this one step at a time. Oh, so we see that they're working with, I see that they're working with sewing machines much clearer when I go to that quadrant view. It really helps me get a better perspective on what I'm looking at. So that is a series we call History Unfolding. I like to start there because I think visual primary sources tend to be the most accessible ones to students. I'd now like to take it up a notch, what I call it, go back to my search, and let's search for, we can get rid of this. We can stay in the same period of the early republic and the new nation and looking towards industrialization. Go to our different series title now, and you see the second one, and I posted this into the chat, is called Debating the Documents. And so I'm going to see, hey, what's available for debating the documents in this same period that we're just looking at? And we're going to see, oh, that's not so many to choose from. So we've got 6 nice activities: Henry Clay's American Systems, the Lowell Experience. So we can see that there are at least a couple of things here. Why Americans invented things. So at least half of the Debating the Documents activities here will reference something about early industrialization. So let's look at this one, A Knack of Contriving, Why Americans Invented Things. And I can go in here, and like History Unfolding, every Debating the Documents is going to take the same format. So it's going to begin with an introductory essay, and that's a nice, that's a little bit more than what we have with just the images. Now look at these introductory essays are not very long. They're about 300 to 500 words. And then we've got a sort of an assessment question. So they read these 5 or 6 short paragraphs, do the assessment question. They can go in here. You've got a timeline available. So every debating the documents is going to have a timeline. And then let's look at what's happening here on our table of contents. You have visual primary sources, 1 and 2, 3 and 4. So 4 visual primary sources, and then an activity where we're comparing them. And then we get to written primary sources and a close reading analysis. And then ultimately, this culminates in a document-based question. So this is a place I often, in working with students, I would begin here with this document-based question, and so that students have an idea of where we're going. Now you can still have the students analyze just the visual images or just the written images. You don't have to assign this whole activity. I'll show you that in a second. But I really do like for students to know, well, what is a document-based question that could come out of this? Even if you're not going to ask them to actually write a 5 paragraphs essay that summarizes everything that they've learned here, at least here they get an idea of sort of the overarching or the essential question that's driving this activity. Okay. So here we can go in. I showed you that introductory essay, the timelines. Here's our visual primary sources, and we get the background information just like under History Unfolding. If we click on the images, it takes us in, and then just like History Unfolding, we have the scaffolding questions that are down below. So here they're analyzing main ideas, background information, inferencing. Okay, so we're being very explicit about the skills that we're helping the students to develop as they analyze this image, and they're going to have the same tools that we had as well in order to be able to analyze them. They go through, they look at images 1 and 2, documents 3 and 4, and then they get to this sort of cool section, and this is where this is now we're asking the students to sort of kick it up a notch. They're not just looking at primary sources to gather evidence. Now we're asking them to make a judgment based on the evidence that they've gathered. So which one of these primary sources would be most useful to a historian trying to understand the nature of invention and technical innovation in America in the early 1800s? Documents 1 and 2 or documents 3 and 4? Now, we didn't dig into these documents specifically enough to be able to know the answer, but I'm going to tell you right now, there is no absolute right answer that it's 1 and 2 as opposed to 3 and 4. The key thing is that the students in the next section justify, I chose documents 1 and 2. Why? Because those spoke more to economic changes in the country. I did not choose documents 3 and 4 because they were more about cultural changes that resulted from industrialization. That's just a sample answer that maybe somebody could come up with. But now with debating the documents, we're asking students to develop those skills that they learned in History Unfolding. In other words, gathering evidence from a visual primary source, but now we're asking them to kick it up a notch and evaluate those sources. They can do the same thing with the written primary sources, and we even break down the writing to a very small chunk. So look at the close reading analysis here. Basically, they're reading 2 sentences, and then we've got some focus questions for them to analyze. So what I really like about both History Unfolding and Debating the Documents is the small chunks of information that we're exposing students to. And we're going to use that to make things more accessible to them. And of course, all of the tools that Pam showed us, well, that was in a previous session, but we do, maybe you didn't see it. If I turn on this little read aloud system here, I can actually go in and I can have this area read to my students. Okay, and you may not have the audio for that, but you get the idea that that's reading to the students. We can also stop that. We can translate this information. I guess I have to click here to stop it. If I wanted to translate this into another language, I hit the world and it just translated that, it looks like, into Spanish, and then I can have it read to me in Spanish as well. And if students have other languages, you can change the languages here by clicking on the gear. And we've got a range of other languages: Japanese, Korean, Russian, Bengali, Vietnamese. You really have quite a good selection. And that's just a way to support the students in terms of their analysis of the content that's there. Now, when I'm going to assign an activity like this, and this is important, this applies both to any of the series that I'm talking to. I do not have to assign the whole thing. I can decide I'm just for this activity, I'm just going to have the students read the introductory essay and analyze visual primary sources 1 and 2. Maybe tomorrow I'll do a different assignment for them and have them look at the timeline, and then I'll assign them visual 3 and 4 and the comparing the documents and the comparison essay. So you can break up any one of these sort of larger lessons into smaller, even more digestible chunks. When you're in this interface, if you forget what you're looking for, what was that visual primary sources 2, 3, and 4? What is the comparison essay asking again? I can click on that and it pops up in a little overview window here to give me an idea about what that content is. So right now, if I were to assign this, I would just be assigning the sections that are marked in blue here. And so the table of contents would look very different from what I have here. And I would go through, and you guys all know how to assign. You select your class or your students or your groups, add any custom highlights you want, add any instructions you might want. This is something new that we've added, that you can allow students to retry after submitting. So if you want the students to be able to submit their answers and submit the whole thing, but then to see in an answer, in an activity like this, you're not going to see the right and wrong answers because it's sort of a little bit more general. But when you've got an activity where the students are being asked multiple choice questions or true false questions, allowing them to retry after submitting or to see the responses after submitting is a way to help them develop competency in that particular area. So that's making them a little bit more formative assessments. Okay, so what I liked about History Unfolding was the visual primary sources. What I like also about debating the documents is you add visual primary sources to analysis of written primary sources, and then you also add in a more overarching document-based question that ties all of that together. Whether you assign all of that to the students is totally up to you. You can just do targeted bits and pieces, but this kicks it up a notch, ask the students to do a little bit more sophisticated multi-step thinking. Okay, any questions so far before I go on to another series in our series title list? Awesome, I'll keep going then. So let's go, I'll clear my search here and we'll go to something, let's go to Causes of the Civil War. And the other series title that I want to look at is called The Historian's Apprentice. So let's see here, that should be The Historian's Apprentice here. And I'm going to just try civil as a keyword here. Do I have anything for the Historian's Apprentice on the Civil War? And the Historian's Apprentice is the most sophisticated. If I started at History Unfolding, being accessible, debating the documents, adding levels of sophistication, Historian's Apprentice is closest thing we have to a pre-AP analysis of, so any students that might be on an advanced placement track or need to develop their understanding of primary sources, this is going to give us 10 primary sources that the students need to combine through a coherent essay, as well as secondary sources that the students are going to be able to look at. So let me go in here to view this. And you can see the topic is also much more specific now. It's not just generally about the Civil War, but very specifically about the Emancipation Proclamation. Was that a political ploy or courageous gamble? You've got a vocabulary here for your introductory essay. You've got vocabulary that comes from the primary sources. So once again, we're supporting the student analysis of primary sources, and we've got some secondary sources here. So we're in this vocabulary system. There's a warm-up activity to introduce the topic. What do you know about the Civil War? The students look at this image. There's some specific questions to get them engaged. And then here's an introductory essay on the Emancipation Proclamation. We can see it's a little bit more sophisticated. There's still short paragraphs, but there's about 10 or 12 of them now rather than 5 or 6. And then his points to keep in mind. These are the types of questions that historians might ask. This is the type of stuff that we're looking for in evidence as primary sources. And these are the types of secondary source interpretations we might find. we go through and help students analyze these 5 habits of historical thinking. So we're really trying to now develop a more sophisticated understanding of why I want to work with primary sources. Well, because historians work with primary sources. Primary sources are the raw footage, the building blocks of history. That's what historians have. They interpret those in order to make sense of them. And here are going to be the 10 different primary sources. And it's going to be now a combination of both textual primary sources as well as visual primary sources. And then each source is going to have background information, the source itself, and then some scaffolding questions to get through it. So there's going to be those 10 different sources. But here's what I really like. I like with this Historian's Apprentice that we also have these secondary sources. And the students are asked to compare. Here's a secondary source. What's a secondary source? Well, it's basically a historian writing about this period. So now not only are we going to see that different primary sources might give us different evidence about a period, but we're going to see that 2 different historians using some of the same primary sources might come to different conclusions. So we're going to really help students understand that just because you look at primary sources doesn't mean that you understand history or that you've got the definitive understanding of history. And while I think that can be overwhelming to some students, it also is meant to be empowering to these students. The students should be empowered to realize that their interpretations matter, that what they think and their gathering evidence from sources makes them into historians that have a legitimate point of view to offer. And so I think that's what is really powerful when we see that even historians disagree on different topics. So here's nice secondary source, only 2 paragraphs. And then you have an activity where you read a passage, take notes on the following questions. But let's go to um, this is my favorite one. From this lesson, you're going to look at each of the secondary sources, and you're going to have to choose 2 primary sources that would best support author one's interpretation of the Emancipation Proclamation, in this case, Hofstetler, and or choose 2 that would support this Gulzo's interpretation of the Emancipation Proclamation, and then also maybe even going to a textbook or traditional source. So basically, what of these 10 different primary sources, which ones would best support those different interpretations? So this really is giving students a more sophisticated understanding of where you can go with primary sources and really getting them into that space to be ready to take advanced placement courses where they're going to be able to, they're going to need to analyze primary sources in order to respond to a document-based question. Okay, I'm going to stop there for a minute before I go on to the next section and see if there's any questions so far, or Pam, any comments or observations from your side?
I haven't seen anything in the chat yet. We'd love to have you pose a question or share a thought with us about the resources that Dr. Willis has just shown you, the 3 different kind of levels of rigor there.
Mhm. Okay. Now, I'm going to do a different strategy. I hadn't planned to talk about this, but because you mentioned a couple of you are doing 7th grade Texas history, let's just see how we can work with Texas history here. So look at Texas studies as its own area, even outside of US history. And then you're going to see your different eras that were mentioned. And where did you guys say that you were at in terms of your 7th grade curriculum right now? Go ahead and unmute yourself and tell me which section I should pick.
Civil War.
Oh, Civil War and okay, right, exactly. I remember you saying that now. So now I'm in Texas Studies, Civil War and Reconstruction, and I might want to add one more thing. Now, let me run the search here, and I'm going to see that I've got. It looks like readings that are available to me for any of these, and I don't know. I'm going to go into these are all level 2 readings. Good. Let's take a look at them. I don't know if these are going to include primary sources. We do have vocabulary and some background information, but these are going to be more like secondary source readings. Sometimes they do include primary sources as part of the overall presentation, but I'm not sure if we're seeing that here. It might come in some of these different sections. So I did want to encourage you, though, that you can run these searches for Texas studies and be able to find information there as well. Now, I do want to also focus on another area, and that's the fourth area or the fourth series title, and that's our DBQ Writing Program. So that's right up here under D, the DBQ Writing Program. And if I run a search on this, this is available both for US and world history, and it's divided up. There's 8 lessons. You can see here lesson 1, lesson 2, lesson 3, lesson 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and then it begins again. So the first part of this is early US history, 1600 to 1865, so up through the Civil War, and you've got the same things. And then basically the difference here is the examples that we use. So here you're going to get the same lesson as you've got up here on the very top, evaluating evidence and primary sources. But whereas the examples in this one are going to come from 1600 to 1865, the examples down here are going to come from 1865 to 1975. So more contemporary introduction. So, and then also we have these for world history, the origins up to the 15th century, and then the 15th to the 20th century. So the examples are drawn from different places. Okay, now that I've said that, what even is this DBQ writing program? Well, as I mentioned, it's 8 different lessons. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, writing a strong conclusion. So everything from evaluating evidence, analyzing visual primary sources, analyzing the question, very important for a document-based question, developing a thesis statement, outlining and planning the essay structure, writing an introductory paragraph, writing and linking the supporting paragraphs, or writing a strong conclusion. Now, what I really like about this is it's not going to give us a formula for this is how you write a strong conclusion. It's going to tell us what a strong conclusion should look like. Then it's going to show us a few conclusions, and it's going to ask us to pick which one do we think is strongest. So this DBQ writing program, it's whereas you might use debating the documents with those DBQ prompts in order to get students really writing, this program is not so much about having them do a lot of writing in responses to DBQs as much as understanding, well, how do I complete all the components? So here it's saying, here's how I'm going to use primary sources in a conclusion. Here's the objectives in the lesson to understand the value of a concise and effective conclusion and to learn to avoid repeating points and adding new ones. We're not going to ask the students to write an essay that doesn't repeat points, but we're going to bring them down here and we're going to offer them, let's see here, choosing a conclusion, exercise part 1. So here's all our documents. Here's the question that we're answering. In this case, in the decade before the Civil War, Americans tried to compromise over the issue of slavery. Ultimately, they were unable to do so. Explain why that was so. Okay, so that's the big question here. And then here's part 1. Here's part 2. In part 2, they're given 3 different conclusions here. Below are 3 conclusions. Read these and choose the conclusion you think best completes the essay. Okay, now obviously we hadn't done all the preceding starts, but what I like about this is we're not really, this is a little bit more accessible for students rather than saying, hey, write a conclusion which is brief and to the point and not redundant. Well, let's show that you can even identify one. So here they're given 3 different conclusions and they identify the one that works best. So this really illustrates how this program works, and that is that we're giving the students the content for what's a best practice, then we're modeling it for them by showing them some different options, and then we're allowing them to sort of pick or vote for what do they think is the best conclusion. And so this might be a really good whole class activity where you've given them these 3 different conclusions, and then you have the students argue, well, why did you pick conclusion 3, and why did you pick conclusion 2, and why did you pick conclusion 1, so that students have an opportunity to verbalize and articulate why they picked a particular conclusion, how that fits in with the rules that they just learned above about what makes a good conclusion, concision, not being repetitive, but not too repetitive, all of these different variables that they're balancing, so they can put that in their mind. And that's what I really like about the DBQ writing program, the way it really models for students samples of good introductory paragraphs, good conclusions, and helps the students sort through, well, can you even recognize a good one if you need to? So this is a great pedagogic tool to help take the students, and I see it as sort of that third or fourth level. I've introduced my students with history unfolding or debating the documents, how to analyze sources. Maybe I used Historian's Apprentice. Really, that's more only for people working with at level high school students, Historian's Apprentice. But anybody could benefit from this DBQ writing program. But I see it as sort of a sequence that comes along. Okay. Great. Yeah, really, really. Thanks, Jennifer. I really think that the idea of modeling is something which is not always easy. And this way you don't have to just keep telling them, no, you're not writing a good conclusion without being able to explain why it's not good. You might have specific details. Here, they can think through it. They can work alone or in small groups to really reason through it. So that's what I really like about these activities. Okay, we've got about 10 minutes left in the session. Let me take a break before I go into any of the other topics or alternatives that we talked about and see if there's any other questions that have come up. Okay. Let me go forward. I think I can get at least one or two more in. Another one that we talked about that was on our list of the secondary ones was the document-based assessments. So I clear this out. Once again, I'm still searching with my series title here. And here they are, document-based assessments. These are nice, short, based on primary sources. We've got almost 75 of them, it looks like, that are in here. And they come in two flavors, level 1 and level 2, I believe. Let's see, these are all labeled level 1. Let me see if I can find a level 2 one. Document-based, the ones in world history have the little bit of a separate title. Let's see, but none of you mentioned world history, so we don't need to go to that. Here's World War II. Document-based assessments in world history, World War II, the road to war. So we know World War II is a topic. Let's take a look at that one. So this one here, we get brief background information. We get a document-based question, and once again, document-based questions, I think it's really important to think of document-based questions as really essential questions. Document-based questions really get at the big issues that come out of what we're studying. So I think whether you're actually going to have students write a 5-paragraph document-based response to a series of questions or not, just helping them to think through, to look at what a DBQ type of question is and to become familiar with how they're structured really gives them an idea of the bigger questions that historians are asking themselves. So this is an example of a question that a historian might ask themselves and then go and get evidence in order to prove a point one way or another. So for this one, why did the world plunge into World War II in 1939? What was the most effective response to aggression, appeasement, or collective security? So we can see what some of the key issues are that are going to come out of these primary sources that we're going to be looking for. Then we go in and we've got a few different primary sources. What I like about these is it gives us multiple ones, but look at how short they are. So we really just get a really short primary source, a couple of comprehension questions, and here also short questions. So these document-based assessments, short and to the point, ultimately culminating in this DBQ type of question. And the teacher's guide on this one, download it, and it's going to give you some insights into sort of the background. Here you go, step-by-step directions for implementing this, and then how to implement it, how to work through the students. And in fact, look at this. You could print this out, and the students, if they needed to work offline or if they didn't have internet access and they had access to this file and could print it out, they can work from this file in order to look and analyze the primary sources and answer the questions there. So that we got to just by clicking on the teacher's notes for that particular activity, and we downloaded that and it brought us in. Okay, now the one last thing that I'm going to show you for the 6th grade teachers is to go and do a search for, as I mentioned, Material World, Hungry Planet, or What I Eat. Let's go into, well, I always like Hungry Planet. And so we go down here. Hungry Planet shows people in 12 different cultures, regions, with a week's worth of food in their kitchen. So this gives you the opportunity, and we consider that each of these, I like this one, compare and contrast. It gives us the most robust activities, but you could focus on a particular region that you're talking about. If you're doing Latin America, maybe you pick this one on Guatemala, but I'm gonna go here and show you what we've got with the general compare and contrast. This will give us, if we go to the image-based activities, we get country statistics for each of the 12 different countries that we're going to be looking at. And then we have these images. So I'm considering the images as primary sources that we're going to gather evidence from these primary sources in order to understand more about how people live in that region of the world. So we're going to be developing those same skills that we use for US and world history, in this case, in the service of a global studies analysis. And we've got all sorts of critical thinking questions that students can do based on these images, writing prompts that they can gather evidence from, or maybe even an activity on life expectancy and obesity, where they're looking at this chart and they're comparing obesity rates in these different countries and the images that they see down here, and we're asking them to maybe guess about where do they think that why would these countries have high or low obesity. So we're going to be asking them to look at images, to gather information from a chart, and then to draw a conclusion from that. So we're trying to build up critical thinking skills and really that multi-step thinking. That's what we call rigorous thinking, and introducing rigor to the student analysis protocols. Okay, so this was a series that we looked at that's called Hungry Planet, and there's individual countries. Material World looks at photographs of people taken with all their worldly possessions out in front of their home, and you can do similar activities where you focus in on a specific country, or you have the students compare between different countries. But the goal is still the same. They're looking at a primary source. They're gathering evidence from that primary source. Sometimes they're gathering evidence from a chart or a graph as well, and then they're forming a conclusion based on that. So no matter what content we're working with, we want your students to develop these important analysis skills. It's literacy in its most general sense. It's literacy in the sense of reading images, reading text, reading charts, reading graphs, gathering evidence, and being able to then make an argument based on that evidence. So any questions? I'm going to stop sharing.